I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction. Wanna bet?
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
You can tell the vibes are very up on this week's, this Thursday edition of the CJ Show. The vibes per 60, way up. You can tell with the way CJ's kind of throwing up his fists. He's doing the hand gestures. He's very excited for someone who has entered off-season mode and is weeks away from retiring off to a cabin where no one will hear from him.
That was me trying to lift the Stanley Cup. I don't know how you mimic it with no trophy in your hand, but I'm trying to do the Mark Stone right now.
I was about to say, as someone you've posed with the Stanley Cup, I'm surprised that there's no photo of you actually raising it like how it was when it was at your dad's house, right?
It was at the Cup Keeper's house in Coburg.
Sorry, the Cup Keeper's house. But your dad was there.
That's the only rule. Honestly, the only rule is that you're supposed to have won it to lift it. Now, on a night like the night they just had in Vegas where it's wild party, I'm sure a few friends and family got their hands on it and managed to lift it, kind of breaking protocol. But the only way to do it is to get either in a massive room where everyone's drunk and blocking out the cup keeper from stopping it, or to do it secretly. So I've never lifted the trophy. I've never tried. I think my days of winning it might have passed me, or potential of winning it. But I've touched it because I just figure, first of all, I'm not all that big on the superstitions that go around. Like, I'm fine if you tweet that Jose Barrios has a no-hitter through 6. That doesn't bother me, for example, which is relevant for anyone who was watching the Blue Jays on Wednesday night. I'm fine when teams touch the Prince of Wales trophy after winning the conference final. And I'm more than fine with someone like, if you get a chance to go to the Hockey Hall of Fame, or if you're at a cup party, I mean, put your hands on that thing. It's such a beautiful trophy.
So there's no superstition out there that you abide by. There has to be one.
I don't think there is, man. I mean, definitely when I was younger, like, I think I probably said, like, I mean, we're going way back to when I played sports and stuff. Like, I think I definitely kind of was raised in that, it's part of certainly hockey culture. There's certain things there's a way you put on your equipment, all that kind of stuff. We see it with a lot of the players still in the NHL. But nowadays not. I mean, the only thing I'm not using is the J word when it comes to great teams or great players.
Oh yeah. Right.
But that's more because other people attach superstition to it. And I don't want them to think I'm actually trying to jinx something. Because anytime I've used that, it was not intended to be a jinx. And so, but if you remember, like, not to make this about me, but when I ran my marathon during COVID, I ran it in a shirt that said Juggernaut. I was trying to make a statement there that, like, I don't see any superstition in attaching myself to that word, but I'm just not going to put that on the teams or players, because some people think like I'm trying to, like, doom whatever the Canadians of 2021 or whatever that was by using it. And I think I might have used it actually this year on the Bruins when they were well on their way to, like, lapping the field 6 times while winning the President's Trophy.
I think you did. I did. If I go back, I vaguely remember you using that about the Bruins, and I remember being surprised because of you might have actually jinxed them. I'll go back on the footage. I might have to go back.
I did. I put Juggernaut in my newsletter during the year. Like, at some point I was writing about the Bruins' dominance. And then I think we discussed it on the pod after that. But I will tell you this, that word is retired. That is the only thing that I'll say is, like, somewhat superstitious. And really, it's about other people, not about me. Like, I don't believe I have the power to jinx anything. Like, it's our job to talk about the sport and the players and the things that go on, but we don't really affect too much. Like, if we're being truthful, I mean, we're reacting to what's happening. We're trying to tell you what's going on behind the scenes sometimes and all those sorts of things, but we don't change the outcome of history. I mean, look, I picked Winnipeg to beat Vegas in round 1. That's how smart I am. Now, by the time it got to the final, I had watched enough of the Golden Knights to realize, okay, I miscalculated in round 1, and I did pick them, as you did, I believe, to win the Stanley Cup by the time we got to the final series. But that's just an example of the ways we don't influence things, because the Golden Knights just marched to one of the cleanest cup wins you can have. And I don't think there's any doubt about their dominance while doing so.
Before we get to one part of the Cup final that you and a few other media members do get to influence, what are your thoughts on the fact that the Golden Knights were able to end a long, agonizing 6-year wait to win the Stanley Cup and prove Bill Foley right?
Well, it's awesome. Like, if you're a fan of a team, you should want your owner out there saying, we're going to win in a number of years. That doesn't mean you have to get old to see it happen. And I think it sets a certain standard within the organization. And what I love about the Golden Knights win, as I just alluded to there, is I don't think there was any element of fluke in it whatsoever. They were clearly the better team in all 4 series they played. They in fact, could have maybe swept the Cup final. They could have pushed Dallas out even a little sooner in the Western Conference final. I mean, they were dominant, frankly, especially at 5-on-5, where a lot of the game is played in the playoffs. And let's face it, this front office, while, yes, they had more favorable expansion rules than teams, 15, 20 years ago, they had to make a lot of big, bold decisions along the way to building that organization to the point where it could have a dominant postseason run. And so I think full marks, full value. I think more organizations should be holding themselves internally to the kind of standard that Vegas has right from day one, or even from day minus 100. When the Golden Knights were just an idea, Bill Foley had these huge visions for what was going to happen. And, to see the scenes as they win that cup, I mean, what a remarkable thing. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, Julian, when there was a lot of people that wondered, like, is the NHL going to work in Vegas? Like, what is this? It's the desert, and people just go there to party, and this or that, like, gamble and party. And it has worked literally since the moment the team arrived. I was there the night of the expansion draft, and there was like a legitimate buzz that day. I was there for the Cup final when they got there against Washington in 2018. I've been there on, random Tuesday nights in February for regular season games. Like, I just think that thing has been a J word right from the beginning. And what I mean is a jumbo success is what I meant by the J word. And they earned everything they got. And I think, we always talk about what's going to be the copycat, what's going to be the follow to this. I think there should be more front offices now thinking, hey, we got to go try to trade for a number 1 center, or, take a big swing in free agency, or, sign a player. And hey, if it's not working out after 2 years, or we have a cap problem, just trade them. And I know that can be rough sometimes on the individual players and their families. I respect that. But I think from a front office standpoint and an approach standpoint, what other teams should be copying is an urgency to try to win. Because I think that at times this has been a passive sport or a passive league, I think the salary cap has kind of had that effect. Now, this year's trade deadline was an exception to that. I have a feeling these next few weeks are going to be an exception to that. As I've stated before, it looks like, to me, we're going to have a pretty active and ample trade market to discuss. But the takeaway for the Golden Knights for me is that they set that standard, and they just went at it and took risks and got it right, and good for them.
And the cool thing too, I mean, if you look at what the roster could look like for next year, I mean, yeah, they have Ivan Barbashev as UFA for the summer, and Teddy Bluger, Phil Kessel, who knows what his career is going to be.
Aiden Hill, bud.
Aiden Hill, Laurent Brossoit, and Jonathan Quick also free agents. But for the most part, their core is still intact. They could easily run it back.
For sure. I mean, there's no reason to think that they won't be in the mix again next year. They certainly, I'm very comfortable saying they'll be in the contender status again next year. I mean, we'll see how everything goes. It's a short summer. It is hard. It's hard enough to do it once. It's hard to do it twice. The Lightning have shown us in recent years it's possible if you get on a run. And I think you got to like the fact that Jai Keuchel is just past mid-20s. So he's still got a lot of years left. I thought he was great in the playoffs. And, someone like Pietrangelo looks to me like he's aging well for what you need. And so, yeah, they've got a few more cracks at it. I would definitely say that.
All right. I want to know about your process for voting for the Conn Smythe Trophy, the playoff MVP. I believe the ballots have all been made public, yours as well. You voted for Jonathan Marchessault, who ended up being named playoff MVP, the first undrafted player to win playoff MVP since
Wayne Gretzky, 1988.
Yes, that is the correct answer. I believe journalists there, tell me if I'm wrong, had until the 10-minute mark of Game 5 to vote.
Yes,
is that how that works?
That's the standard, and you know, I've done this process many years now, and it's 10-minute mark of the third period of any game that could decide the cup. So even in the event that Game 5, that Florida was up 5-1, just for argument's sake, we still would have had to cast a ballot that the league tabulates, because obviously they give out that award. They give out that award before they award the Stanley Cup officially to the team, and so you know, there's a certain process that goes on behind the scenes with the league. You know, I don't have insight into that. I can just tell you get a couple people's email that you're supposed to submit your ballot to, and it must be in by the 10-minute mark of the third period. And so it's an agonizing process. It's never easy. I mean, obviously some years have been more clear than others. I think that there really was legitimate arguments for, you know, even in the end, Mark Stone, who didn't make my top three, I think Jack Eichel obviously had a very legitimate argument to win it. I think that there could have been an Aiden Hill camp because he was that exceptional. Probably the thing that might have hurt him in some voters' eyes, and I haven't talked to them all, but it's just the idea that he came in a little later in the playoffs, and maybe that, you know, the feeling that Golden Knights were so dominant that lots of goalies could have had success there. I don't know what everyone's thought process was. I really wrestled with it, honestly. And for me, it came down to Eichel or Marchessault. You know, the argument I think for Eichel is he's the most important center on the team that's winning. You know, he ended up finishing with the most amount of points in the playoffs, although I think he picked up a point after the point where we voted. So, you know, at the moment when you're voting, you don't know for sure who's going to, because it was so close and there was a few guys there, you don't know who's going to finish as a playoff scoring leader. I think he played his last 11 games, if I'm not mistaken, without a goal, you know, which could impact how some people think. But, you know, he clearly had a huge impact on the series. In fact, him and Marchessault were line mates. You know, he was helping set up a lot of those goals, but scoring a goal, by and large, is more difficult than setting up a goal, I would argue. And I just couldn't get past the fact at the end when I looked at, you know, it's playoff MVP. And Jonathan Marchessault scores 13 goals in the playoffs. 10 of them either tied a game for Vegas or were a go-ahead goal. I mean, he just scored big goal after big goal after big goal after big goal right from the second round, third round, and through the Cup final. But, you know, that being said, this wasn't a year where I just knew he was number one. Like, I'm even watching Game 5 really going over in my head, what am I going to do here? And, you know, it is what it is. I think it's really easy to second guess. I am totally fine. If someone, you know, I think 5 of my colleagues put Eichel in the number 1 slot. I believe all 5 of them had Marchessault in number 2. You'd have to double check that for me, but I'm almost certain. And so what that tells me, again, I haven't spoken. This is the other thing I do. I don't talk to the other voters at all about what they're thinking. Like, I don't want to influence one way or another anyone else who's voting. That's just the way I feel about it. And so, you know, that tells me, though, that all my colleagues were wrestling with a similar kind of decision. Pretty much everybody had either Eichel 1 or Marchessault 1, and I was one of 13 that had Marchessault in the top slot for those reasons I mentioned. I mean, he was really good, man. Look at even like the old school stats, like plus minus. If you look at scoring chances created, I know going into that last game, he had the highest number of shots on goal for the Golden Knights. I mean, he was a difference maker for them, and that's basically how I got there. It's imperfect. I kind of wish in a way there was a way to do it where we vote after the final game ends. Like, I think, but we're just not quite there yet. I have to think there'll be a future world, though, where there's some kind of electronic system where when the game ends, that whoever's voting, I mean, I'd probably be past my voting stages at that point, but there's got to be a way to get it in, because it gets really hard if it gets to a Game 7, Julian, because you go into a Game 7 and you're like, okay, Team A is going to win or Team B. So you're basically dealing with 2 teams worth of players you're considering, and you might have that game might go to overtime of Game 7, and you might be choosing between 2 players, and one player might score the Game 7 overtime winning goal. Well, that player if you're that close, should probably get the nod. But anyway, you do the best you can, and we live with the results.
By the way, you are correct. Everyone, all 5 people who voted Jack Eichel first, voted Jonathan Marchessault in second place. Aiden Hill also got votes as well. Mark Stone got votes as well.
Matthew Tkachuk had one, I think.
One third place vote going to Matthew Tkachuk. I won't say who the journalist is, but they did vote.
Was it JF Shomo?
It was JF Shomo. I wasn't going to say their name, but since you guessed it, yes, it is JF.
It's public. I mean,
it is public.
I'm part of the Professional Hockey Writers Association. We want accountability. Like we want to put our names to our ballots. When we go through the awards process later this month, every ballot becomes public. Now it's a lot of ballots to sort through. If you want to get mad at your local beat writer or your favorite national writer to bash of choice, but we want those things to be public. And so, yeah, that was what I went through. That was probably the hardest year I can remember. There might be some recency bias in that. I recall it being difficult. The first Penguins Cup, Crosby Kessel, and I think it literally went down to like one vote either way. Sidney Crosby won in 2016, but there's a lot of debate and a lot of criticism. I mean, if you're going to vote, you got to take some crap. And so I've explained my process, and that's how I got there. Basically, I couldn't ignore the big goals he scored, the role he played in their success. And just if you look right down the line through scoring chances, shots on goal, he was a driver of an offense that helped win the cup. And ultimately, this game is won by scoring goals. And the Golden Knights, he wasn't scoring a lot of goals at the end of those 6-0 wins or whatever the one they had over Dallas. Like he was scoring the big goals for them when they needed them.
Should also mention too, Jonathan Marchessault, I believe, had points in his last 10 games up until the cup was raised. A 10-game point streak to end the postseason. That's also a very impressive stat for the playoff MVP. That is Jonathan Marchessault.
A Golden Knights record.
A Golden Knights record. One last thing, and then we'll get to Sports Interaction. What did you think of that quote from Phil Kessel that went viral? Takes me back to my Toronto days. You guys said I couldn't win, and now I'm a 3-time champ. Remember that.
I think when you win, when you've had the success Phil has had since leaving Toronto, you get to have the last word, and I've got no problem with it. And I also have no problem with it because you can go back and read my work if you want to go back 10 years. I was never one saying you can't build a team to run around Phil Kessel. I was always in the camp that you need more good players to have Phil Kessel be the maximum he could be. I mean, there was at least one season, I think he finished 6th in league scoring on a Leafs team that had nothing around him. He was a solo mission man and was still one of the best scorers in the league. I know he didn't play ultimately in the Stanley Cup final games for Vegas, but he was a huge part of Pittsburgh's 2 cups. To me, he's already had the last word, but someone put a microphone in his face. He's feeling a little frisky, and I got no problem with it because he's absolutely right. There is a huge movement in Toronto at the time that you can't win with Phil Kessel. This isn't the sort of player you build a team around. This, that, the other thing. And, really, I think what people miss at that time is they just didn't have enough players with Phil Kessel for the Leafs to win or have the success they were looking for back then. And so, hey, if you win, you get to put hot dogs in the cup. You get to say what you want. And I'm curious, maybe that's the end of Phil Kessel's career. I don't know where things go from here. I mean, he played all 82 games in this regular season to extend his Ironman streak, but that might be a swan song. We'll have to see what the offseason holds.
Yeah, we'll have to see for one Phil the Thrill Kessel. All right, let's get to You Can Bet That and the rest of the CJ Show.
You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Brought to you by Sports Interaction. Get in the action and make a play. 19 plus. Please play responsibly.
Time for You Can Bet That. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. Who will the Montreal Canadiens pick? They are currently in the 5th overall slot. Maybe some reports out there that they might want to look into jumping a little higher than that potentially. But the betting favorite for the Montreal Canadiens for their first pick in this year's draft, Matvei Michkov. A lot of fans want to see the Canadiens pick Matvei Michkov. David Reinbacher, the defender from Austria, also in the running. Will Smith is there as well. Zach Benson at 6.50 as well. And 5th, Dalibor Dvorsky, also in the running, according to our friends at Sports Interaction.
You get a little tougher when you get to the 5th pick, right? Because there's more cascading circumstances that can send a team in various directions. I'm with you. I think that, I'm sure you make due diligence calls if you're in Kent Hughes' seat to see if maybe there's an opportunity to pick a little higher. I just don't see why any of the teams ahead of them would be willing, even for a good player, to give up their pick. I mean, the teams above them, let's face it, they sucked on purpose this year. They all wasted a season essentially. All of them wanting Connor Bedard, but I mean, there's other attractive pieces right at the top of that draft. It's Fantilli, Leo Carlsson. And so I don't see what you could give up that would compel those teams to then just be like, oh yeah, okay, then take our pick. The Michkov question is going to be dominating discussion leading right up until we get to the draft floor for the Canadians. And I think it's somewhat intriguing that he's, viewed as the favorite there. I mean, really, you're looking at 3 years before he's able to come over from Russia because of a contract he signed the KHL. The question I think you have to ask yourself when making this call is, do the Canadians intend to be good enough to win before 3 years? Or are they content, like some teams going to be, to take a player with really enticing skill and talent, but have to wait to quite a while, relatively speaking, before you're going to get him in your lineup?
I'm going to ask this question to you on draft week, but if you were GM in that top 5 and you had an opportunity to take Matvei Michkov, would you take it?
It depends on the situation, but I would say generally not. Again, it's down to each team. You have to be doing a forecast of when you're going to be competitive. I mean, what's really valuable about the NHL's system for CBA is those first 3 years, right? I mean, there's a maximum you can pay a player, and generally the best players outperform what those contracts are. And so in some cases, it's not the worst thing to have him come in a few years down the road and start his 3-year entry-level deal because, let's face it, I mean, maybe your team is still going to be building up and then he's joining a better team. But there's also a lot of push generally from ownership or what have you to, if you finish at the bottom of the standings, to get one of those top picks, to get back to the playoffs and earning more revenue. And so there's, it's a delicate line to walk. But I don't have any doubt about him coming to North America long term. I think it's sort of like a Kirill Kaprizov or, way back when Evgeny Kuznetsov with Washington took a number of years after being a first round pick to join them, but has obviously helped bring them a Stanley Cup and had some great seasons there. I think he's going to be a great player in the NHL. I think it's just, you have to survey, can you wait if you're owner or depending on where your team's window's at.
Okay. I will ask you this question as we get closer to the draft, but I do appreciate your answer here. And You Can Bet That segment comes to a close. Check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. Best odds before game, in game, and the best props. sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Manscaped. Uh-oh. It's June. It's mid-June. Father's Day is right around the corner. Have you gotten anything for your dad yet? Don't worry, because that's where Manscaped comes in. We both know he needs some serious grooming in his life. Get your dad the Lawnmower 4.0, and he will thank you enormously for helping him tame the beast. It's a win-win situation for both mom and dad. Plus, if you use code CJShow, you'll save 20% off and get free shipping. I think that's a pretty good deal, guys, especially if you are looking for a last-minute Father's Day gift. The Lawnmower 4.0 is in there. Really great technology, helping out below the waist. And again, your dad will thank you for that. Your mom might thank your dad as well for that, too. The ability to shave in the dark with the 4000K LED spotlight is an option. You can change the guard lengths as well with sizes 1 through 4. It is very different from other trimmers. And of course, if you're going through the other products that they have, the Weed Whacker, I got my dad one of those one year for nose and ear hair. It's the best nose and hair trimmer on the market and the perfect gift for your pops. Manscaped's also got cologne, the Crop Mop, ball wipes, Crop Reviver ball toner, Crop Preserver ball deodorant as well. It's really sweet. For everyone else listening who is wondering about some of these products too, they're cruelty-free, paraben-free, dye-free, and even vegan. Never thought I'd have to think about these products being vegan, but here we are. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code CJShow at manscaped.com. Get your dad a gift you know he will use. Hey, happy Pride, listeners. We celebrate Pride here at SDPN because we believe that sports are only fun if everyone is welcome. We're also really excited to share that we are once again working with our good friends at the Get Real movement, and we're joining their fundraising efforts by joining a virtual 5K on June 23rd. The money we raise will be going to Rainbow Railroad. Their mission is to help LGBTQI+ people escape state-sponsored violence. It's an extremely important cause, and we've got a link in the description below. Please check it out and support if you can. And stay tuned as we continue to celebrate Pride Month. We're just getting started. Siege, as we're now getting deeper and deeper into the NHL offseason, I'm kind of curious from your vantage point, what are some of the biggest storylines you're looking for as we approach the draft and free agency?
What's crazy is all the stories, not all of them, but a lot of the big stories are in Canada here, right? Like it feels like this kind of potentially volatile offseason for the Canadian teams. You know, in Toronto, you have a new general manager in Brad Treliving. In Calgary, you have Craig Conroy promoted to the seat, replacing Treliving. And, you know, in Winnipeg, you've got 3-star players that Kevin Cheveldayoff has to make big decisions on. You know, obviously this week in Ottawa, there's been an ownership change. You know, it's going to take months before Michael Andlauer and his group take formal control of the Senators. But, you know, Pierre Dorion is now navigating a difficult situation with Alex DeBrincat in terms of trying to find a suitable trade for him. You know, Vancouver's got a clear cap space. Edmonton's trying to it just feels like a lot of the action is actually going to come through the Canadian teams. You know, maybe one of the first storylines that comes to mind, I'm not saying it's actually one in terms of ordering them, but is what kind of impact or imprint is Brad Treliving going to put on the Leafs? Because, you know, what I can tell you right now is Brad Treliving was in Arizona this week, meeting with Austin Matthews. I mean, so we've talked a lot about that, the dynamic there. I don't think this meeting, at least my understanding of it, is that there wasn't really a negotiation session or anything like that in terms of the contract. It's more, you know, sharing the vision for the team, you know, discussing where things might go, just, you know, really a chance to get to know each other and start what will lead down the path to negotiation. But we haven't really focused as much on William Nylander, right? And I think in some ways, look, Austin Matthews is the most important decision because he's the most important player on the team. But to me, there's no doubt he's coming back. And so it's really with William Nylander is more of a question, right? Because if you can't sign him to a deal that the team thinks it can accommodate, then they might have to look at trading him. I don't see it going that way with Matthews. And, you know, so where does that number fall? And I think if you're William Nylander coming off an 87-point season, you're probably looking for an extension that starts with a 9. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying $9 million on the button gets it done. I mean, maybe it's 9.5, 9.75. You know, I think that's probably the range you're going to push for. I would imagine the Leafs are willing to give him a raise on where he's been, but they're going to likely want that number to start with an 8. And so that actually might be the negotiation that ends up happening or playing out before the Matthews one does. Because I do think the Leafs need some clarity on quicker with Nylander. Like, is he here or not? I think there's a mutual confidence that the Matthews thing will get done in time and that it might just need some time. Like maybe you get through the rush of free agency, everyone takes a breath and you revisit it later in the summer and figure out what goes on there. And so you wonder, like, will they be getting an 8-year deal for William Nylander? Can they keep him under 9 if it gets to 8 years? And so I think that's a big decision. But then you go further down the lineup, Julian, and it's my understanding at this point that some of the veteran players that have been with the Leafs that are UFAs, like Alex Kerfoot, Justin Hall, Michael Bunting even, that they won't be back. That I think those players are all going to the open market now. And the result of that is the Leafs have to sign or trade for a bunch of NHL forwards and perhaps a couple defensemen, because Brad Treliving has sort of hinted he wants to make a remake of the Leafs defense, kind of in terms of style and the kind of players they have back there. And so I think of all the GMs in Canada, I'm not saying that others don't have, I mean, I think everyone has anyone who's a GM in a Canadian city has a busy few weeks and month ahead. But I think Brad Treliving has probably the most to do because, you know, how are you going to fill out the bottom half of the roster? Who are you going to trade for that plays alongside Austin Matthews? I mean, that's largely been Michael Bunting's role the last 2 seasons. And it seems pretty clear that they're going to be going in another direction there. And so that's a storyline, not just because it's the Leafs. I just think that there's a lot of different ways that you can go. And obviously he's new in the door. I mean, Kyle Dubas was with the Leafs for 9 seasons and the last 5 as GM. I mean, he had a certain vision for the team and he did his thing. I think Treliving's going to come at it with a fresh set of eyes. And so that's a major storyline. You know, if I go to number 2, sticking on the theme, it's got to be the Jets. You know, and we've been over this a lot, but the closer and closer it gets to July 1st, my mind starts to go like, whoa, like they have to figure out how to Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's not going to re-sign on a long-term deal there, and has a small list of teams I think that he would consider signing a long-term deal. They have to navigate a situation with Connor Hellebuyck. They have to figure out what they're doing with Mark Scheifele. They have to figure out what they're doing with Blake Wheeler. Maybe not discussed as much. I know there's been some discussion. Maybe he's someone they might look to execute a buyout on. I think his contract's clearly more difficult to trade than his younger teammates. And that's just a massive offseason for a team that I know the Jets have not reached the peaks that we thought they might when they went to the Western Conference Final back in 2018. But they've been a pretty consistently strong team and certainly had a lot of good players over the number of years. And you just wonder, how do they move forward from that? And I think at this stage, what I tell you is there's way less answers. We have all these questions. I don't think they've committed to one path. I don't think they're going into it saying we're trading this one of those three guys and we're going to hold on to this guy. Like, I think that they're having to sort of consider all and every option. But that's a massive offseason for one GM to go into. And let's face it, I think that they could use some change there, but this might be more change than you want to have if you're in the Jets GM seat.
I mean, I guess, but they failed at so many different turns. They just saw their former head coach take another team, not only take them to the Stanley Cup final, even if they did lose, but also admit that the atmosphere there was so good. He's admitting to being less cynical. Like, getting out of Winnipeg did wonders for Paul Maurice. There has to be some kind of change under the hood culturally for the Winnipeg Jets.
Well, I'm not to get all Giannis on you, but we can't say it's a failure. I mean, 31 teams fail if we use that definition. I mean,
But that's okay to say. Teams fail.
I don't know
but it's part of the process. It's part of the process. I know. Look, Giannis is a very different breed in terms of what he's saying about failure, because when you look at how he got to the NBA in the first place, like, it's a very different journey from so many other people in that situation. I can understand why he wouldn't necessarily look at certain things as a failure, or why anyone else could look at that situation and feel that way. But when we say that a team fails, it doesn't necessarily, we're not saying that like they're bums, discard them, relegate them to a lower league. You failed. It happens. You have to fail over and over and over again until you succeed. It happens. Vegas has been in the league for like 6 years. They failed at different points. They blew a series lead to San Jose. Remember that one year in the first round? They failed. It is okay to say you failed. I'm tired of people saying that like, oh, you didn't fail or anything like that. You did. You failed. It's not like school where you get an F and then it's going to reflect on, it's like a mark that follows you for the rest of your life. If you fail in sports, I get changes happen. But like, you could fail and still win at the end of the day. It happens. It's okay to say you failed. That was a lot.
I just think there's danger in absolutes, right? And I think that there's some danger in looking at like Paul Maurice leaving. Like, he was 8 years in Winnipeg. I think they took that as far as they could, both he and the team.
Yes.
Right. And look at the winds of change are blowing. That's maybe my takeaway. If you want an off-season storyline, like, I just want to see what those winds bring. That to me is interesting. We'll go to the third topic, and this might be one a little less discussed, but it's on my mind. Erik Karlsson is likely going to pick up his third Norris Trophy in a week, 10 days time. Are we going to actually see a guy traded in the same window where he's picking up his third Norris? And it's my understanding. I mean, obviously we talked during the season at the trade deadline. Edmonton and other teams did have discussions with the Sharks about what could work. I don't know if ultimately, when push came to shove, anything got particularly close, because I think the barriers were so high that there was legitimate interest, but it was just hard to find mutual ground. Those same issues maintained. He's got 4 years left on his deal. His cap hit is still among the highest in the league. But what I'll say is that in the offseason, I think it's a little easier perhaps, and nothing about this will be easy, but it's a little easier for other teams to move around money or to get creative with some solutions. And, it's my understanding that there have been discussions with the Sharks this offseason since the year ended on Karlsson. And so I don't think anything is far down the line at this stage. I think you're still, teams that are maybe really interested are kind of lining up and having those preliminary discussions. But that would be a monster trade. I mean, that would be one of the bigger trades we've seen just from a cap perspective. I don't know what the return will end up looking like. We heard all kinds of things at the deadline? Is it going to be multiple first-round picks, this or that? But, I mean, let's look where San Jose's at, right? I mean, they traded Timo Meier. Last summer, they traded Brent Burns. They clearly want to get veteran salary off the books and get deeper into their own rebuild. And I think that this is maybe one that people are sleeping on, is just what the Sharks do with Karlsson, and do we see him somewhere else? I mean, he just saw Mark Stone, right? His former buddy just lifted the cup. You know that Erik has a birth certificate. Erik knows what age he is, that he still just had this season. He's got to be feeling great after the season he just had individually. But, he knows that 100-point seasons and a fourth Norris Trophy don't matter. What matters is getting a chance to play for the mug. And I think that this will be an offseason ultimately where he's moved. But, that's still the pieces are still aligning for that to happen at this point in time.
I wonder how likely we see a third team involved in a deal with Erik Karlsson, considering the salary cap hit that he has.
The trouble with that is most teams don't want to retain salary for 4 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, teams are willing to do that in a 1 or even sometimes a 2-year window because they have clarity on where they're at. I think more than likely you're going to see a team trade some salary back that maybe they don't like. Like, I think that's the way to, there's different ways to achieve the same goal, right? One is to just straight up have a team retain on Karlsson and include a third party, but another is to be trading a contract back that helps sort of offset some of that cap hit. It's a daunting task, and Mike Greer's still, relatively new in his seat, basically a year on the job now. But I just think that the Sharks need it. I think that Karlsson needs it on some level. I mean, as much as he's loved calling that area home, he kind of directed himself in part to that situation. He's not at his age and at his stage. Does he want to stick around for a rebuild? It just doesn't make much sense for either side.
Yeah, that's fair. Any other storylines percolating? There's one in my mind, but a slight bias.
You throw it out there. Throw it on the table.
I mean, in the market that I'm in, the Calgary Flames, Elias Lindhom, I believe he's the biggest domino to fall in terms of some of the pending UFAs that they have for next summer. And depending on what happens with him, whether or not he wants to stay in Calgary, that could affect essentially their plan of action for this season and next, essentially. We're seeing reports out there that Craig Conroy does, not even just reports. Craig Conroy has gone out there and said he wants to find a way to keep Elias Lindhom, and he's a guy that he's going to try that you teams would normally build around. I wrote a story with Shayna Goldman a couple of days ago where we were trying to project out what his next contract could look like, and according to the numbers from Evolving Hockey, it could be like an 8-year, $8.7 million deal if you're going off some of the comparables like Bo Horvat or Mika Zibanejad. But like with Elias Lindhom, he's that big domino in that market, and depending on what happens with him, it's going to be a very interesting next set of weeks in terms of what they end up doing with him. If he says, you know what, I want to leave, they ship him off maybe at the draft probably. That's what it's probably going to look like. I don't sleep on the Calgary Flames in terms of excitement. I know they're only picking 16th, but I think they're going to do something.
Well, what I can tell you is that he is interested in staying.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely open to it. But he's kind of in the driver's seat, right? He's like a lot of these players that are 1 year out from UFA with teams having to make a decision on him. I mean, he's not going to necessarily bend over backwards to give them a better salary. That he's going to have certain numbers met, and I don't know exactly what those numbers are to make it make sense. But I think with the right vision for building out the organization and the right contract on the table, I think there's definitely a path to getting that done. What the Flames have to determine as they work through this, and the impression I'm getting is they're not in really negotiations yet either. It's more just, again, the conversation phase. Hey, here's our new head coach, and keeping him in the loop about what's going on. But I don't think they're getting down and crunching numbers just yet. But the Flames have to figure out, does that number make sense for them? And does signing him into his mid to even beyond mid-30s at a big cap hit makes sense? I mean, they did that last year, obviously, a different general manager, and signing Nazem Kadri to a 7-year deal as a UFA, somewhat different circumstances, but they've now got some of that kind of money on the books. Do you double down on somewhere else, or do you look down the trade route? I mean, I think it could still break a couple different ways. Even if the team wants to keep him and he wants to stay, it doesn't mean that they can find the right deal to make that happen. No, but it's certainly not a case where he wants out of town. I think that those will be productive talks. I think there's still a lot of runway there, but you're right. That's a domino because Craig Conroy's already said it as his introductory news conference to reporters. Like, he doesn't want to have all these lame duck situations going the next season, have it be maybe a question for the team. And of course, have it be a situation like the one he experienced as the assistant GM where Johnny Gaudreau walked out the door for nothing, ultimately, as the team was trying to sign him a couple of years ago. So, Calgary has too many goalies, one too many. So does Dan Vladar get moved, or I don't know, do they look at trading one of the other two? Obviously Calgary's in a position somewhat similar to Toronto, but they have more NHL players currently on the books, but they definitely need to fill out, a good chunk of the roster still with some contracts. And you're right, they're almost as much, they got to address the now in these next 3 to 4 weeks, but they also have to think about next summer now because of the 7 players that have expiring deals then. And that would just be a lot to bring into that would be a gray cloud, I think, hovering over next season if they came back in the fall with those situations, at least a couple of them not resolved one way or the other, which of course is a contract extension this summer or perhaps a trade.
If there are no other storylines, I could also just quickly plug your revamped big board up at the North Star Bets website, the CJ's Big Board 2.0. Looking at who is number one. Should I spoil who number one is?
Dmitry Orlov.
There we go. Orlov, Bertuzzi, O'Reilly, I should say.
I mean, it won't surprise you to hear that when I put out these big boards, I get a lot of feedback. Some people disagreeing with an order or, whatever. But I think some people thought Orlov should have been one from the start. Perhaps for his all-around defensive abilities. I had him number 2 initially behind Damon Severson, who obviously went to Columbus in that sign and trade. Mostly because Severson, right shot, maybe, he's younger. So I think that has some appeal when it comes to that. I'll be curious to see, though. So Severson got $6.25 million on his 8-year deal. How many, if any, of the free agents get an AAV that exceeds 6.25? I think Orlov will, but I'm not sure if anyone else on that list does. I mean, the other possibilities at forward, you look at, I don't think at this stage Patrick Kane's going that high. You got Ryan O'Reilly. I think Alex Killorn comes in under that. I'm just thinking off the top of my head some of the other players that I put in the top 10 there. But that tells you a little bit about this free agent class. We're not talking about a $9 million, $10 million signing in free agency like the last couple of years. We had Johnny Gaudreau go for over $9 million. A couple of years ago was Dougie Hamilton is one of the top paying guys. This is more of a mid-tier, still very good. Dmitry Orlov's been a first pairing defenseman in the league and had a really good half season or partial season with the Boston Bruins after the trade from Washington. So he's the number one. And then we've got players like Ivan Barbashev, right? He's got some Stanley Cup shine on him, second Cup win, and clearly the kind of player that can be successful in the playoffs. You've got Aiden Hill from Golden Knights. You've got Radko Gudas, who was pretty effective throughout those playoffs on Florida's side. And so I think that there are players that teams have just watched, really raise their games and deliver in big moments. And I think that those will be pretty appealing candidates in free agency. But I think the biggest players, like the biggest player movement this offseason is going to be trades, I think. I think we're going to see significant names moved, whether it's the Pierre-Luc Dubois, Alex DeBrincat. Philadelphia still has a couple guys in the market, and Konechny and Scott Laughton. Maybe Carter Hart's dealt. I'm a little more skeptical on that one, but I know his name's been out there a lot. Carolina, don't sleep on them. There's some talk that Brett Pesce, might be available. He's 1 year out from needing a new contract, so he's in a similar situation to a lot of the players we're talking about being traded. And so I think that we're going to have some fireworks on the trade market, and then of course the UFA market come July 1st. So this is a pretty fun 2.5 weeks on the calendar if you like that sort of thing. And the one last storyline we didn't talk about is that as of Friday, teams can start the buyout process, and that runs through June 30th. So it's not necessarily that you're going to see the first buyouts executed right on Friday, but we have a few teams to keep an eye on. I look at Boston, which has tremendous cap issues entering this offseason. Did they look at a buyout? Vancouver, their cap troubles are well documented, but perhaps they're a team to watch there. I think a lot of teams, what do the Leafs do with Matt Murray? Is he a potential buyout? Did they trade him? Edmonton, I think will be trying to trade Kailer Yamamoto, but maybe they have to buy him out if they can't find a partner. I think a lot of teams, because remember, Julian, we don't have the cap yet but everyone's operating under the idea that it's going to be just a $1 million bump to $83.5 million. So a lot of these top teams need to create some space in the next 2 weeks. And so you're going to see some buyouts here in the next week too.
I was already excited for the next 2 weeks. And after that dump of information, which was a lot, by the way, you dropped some gems today, Siege. A lot of people are going to be excited, man. You're getting everyone hyped up.
I do it for the 100%ers, bro. They keep me going.
Do you have any stick taps before we wrap up today's episode?
I could go lots of ways, right? We got Nick Taylor. We could be giving love to. Jamal Murray wins an NBA title, Canadian.
That was going to be mine, yes.
Okay, you go to Jamal. I'm going to go for an unheralded member of the Golden Knights, and that's Tom Porzaska. And most people listening to the pod might not know who he is, but he used to run the site General Fanager. And, what he did at the time, and I got to know Tom a little bit because he was based in Toronto, and he was around some Puck Talks events I did. And he would help me out from time to time with stories I was working on. But he put an expansion draft tool on his site about a year leading up to that Vegas expansion draft, and ultimately got hired by the Golden Knights, has since become a valued member of their hockey operations department. And on a couple nights ago this week, General Fanager won the Stanley Cup with the Golden Knights. And so you won't see a lot of press about that one, but Steve Dangle is reminding us of that in their group chat. And I thought, how cool is that basically a guy, talk about turning your dream into a reality. He basically was helping game plan what the Golden Knights might do at the expansion draft, first just for the public who wanted to do that exercise, actually gets to do the real thing with Vegas and ultimately is part of a Stanley Cup winning front office. And all the good decisions that front office made, we'll never know exactly what degree of impact Tom had, but I'm sure it's a big one behind the scenes.
Big stick tap for him. Congratulations on the Stanley Cup championship. I'm going to give mine to Jamal Murray, joining a growing list of Canadians who have won an NBA championship. Not a great week if you are from South Florida, unfortunately, with Miami and Florida losing in their respective championships. But really cool to see Jamal Murray come back from a big injury layoff to team up with Nikola Jokic to win an NBA championship over the Miami Heat for the Denver Nuggets. Good timing if you're from Colorado, though. You get the Avalanche winning the Cup last year and the Nuggets winning this year. So big stick tap to Kitchener, Ontario's own Jamal Murray.
Represent
indeed. Get your questions in now, whether on Twitter or on Discord for the Monday edition of the CJ Show. Subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to this great show. And we'll be back on Monday, Siege.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.